38 years ago, the rock group Wham released the song Last Christmas. And since then, just about everybody who is in pop music and has produced a Christmas album, just about every one of them has included that song on their Christmas album. And when I say just about everybody, I mean just about everybody. According to the information that I found on the website secondhandsongs.com, more than 430 versions of the song have been produced. And the list just keeps growing. I did the math and I recognized the fact that you're talking about, on average, 11 new recordings of that old song are produced every year. And I think I know why. I think it's released every year for a couple of reasons. Of course, one of them is money. I mean, after all, if that song had a history of being a flop, people would not be, consistently taking the risk of including it in their album, right? I mean, when it comes to making Christmas albums, I think the song is a kind of a given success generator. Even though it may not always produce a top charting hit, apparently that song, when it's put on a Christmas album, is always very well received. So for sure, I think one of the reasons that new versions of that song keep coming out year after year after year after year is money. But here's the deal, folks. I think the real reason that song just keeps getting released year after year after year and enjoys a measure of success almost every time it does, really, I think it boils down to the fact that its lyrics resonate with us in that they express hopes that lie deep within every human heart. The lyrics express the hope of moving past dissatisfaction to satisfaction. They express the hope of moving past hurt and on to healing. They express the hope of having our sorrows turned to joy. With almost 4 decades of it being out there, more than 400 versions of the song out there, I'm guessing most of you are pretty familiar with the lyrics. But for those who haven't heard the song or those who are only slightly familiar with it, let me just tell you, and if you want to say it with me, you can say it with me, but the opening words of the songs are, "Last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it away. This year, to save me from tears, I'll give it to someone special." Well, maybe like George Michael, who wrote the song Last Christmas, maybe Last Christmas for you was a real bummer. Maybe, like him, last Christmas your heart was broken. Maybe last Christmas you were feeling very down because a loved one died. Maybe last Christmas was very disappointing to you because you didn't get to spend it with family. Maybe you were sick last Christmas. Maybe you had a lot of financial problems last year at Christmas time. And so, like I said, maybe last year for you was a real downer. On the other hand, maybe last year was a great Christmas for you. Maybe it wasn't just a good one for you. Maybe it was a great Christmas for you. Maybe in your heart and your mind, as you think back to last Christmas, you think, man, last Christmas was one of the best Christmases, if not the very best Christmas I have ever experienced in my life. And maybe as a result, you're approaching this Christmas with a little bit of doubt, a little bit of hesitation, because you're just thinking in your heart and mind, I don't see how this Christmas can come close to last Christmas. Well, whether last Christmas was good for you or not, whether it was a good one or bad one, it doesn't really change my hope for you for this Christmas. My hope for you and my hope for myself for this Christmas is this. I hope that we all have an awful Christmas. Yes, yeah, you heard me right. I hope we have an awful Christmas this year. That's all. Full, as in 2 words. All and full, not as in one word, awful. Of course, I wouldn't want you to have an awful, as in one word, a bad Christmas or a terrible Christmas. But I do very much want you and I to have an awe-full Christmas, as in a Christmas where our heart is just full of awe when it comes to our thinking about the birth of Jesus Christ. And here's the truth. I think deep down inside each and every one of us, I think that is really, friends, what we want. I believe we all really have within us, deep within us, a desire to have an awe-full Christmas. I really do. And I think that would make perfect sense if what I'm about to tell you is true. If, in fact, you and I were created by God to experience awe, then it would make perfect sense for us to desire to have an awe-full Christmas. Again, that's A-W-E space F-U-L-L. Awe. Awe, it's not something that has to be taught. Awe is programmed into our human DNA, our spiritual DNA. I mean, after all, we do not have to teach children awe. You do not have to teach a small child to look in awe at a butterfly or at a puffy white cloud making its way across a blue sky. It's just something they do. If you're a parent or a grandparent, you no doubt have had moments where you were outside and with the kids or the kid, and you're making your way, inside the house at a certain time for whatever reason, and there you are headed into the house, and that 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old child is kind of in tow as you're going in house. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe instead of, maybe you're in the house and you're headed to the car. And that child is kind of, in step with you, kind of just falling right there with you. And then all of a sudden you notice that they're no longer there. And it's like, they're 3 or 4 steps behind you all of a sudden. And so what happens is you turn around to see what's going on, and you turn around, and there they are, and they've stopped. Stopped in their tracks, and they're standing there, and they're just looking at this butterfly. Or they're looking at the ants making their way across the sidewalk. And while at that moment, when they've stopped in their tracks, you may kind of, see that moment as an inconvenience, or as a delay, as the kid's inability to stay on, task with you. Please, whatever you do, please do not look upon that moment as a matter of sheer outright disobedience. Because more than likely, what you're witnessing in those moments, friends, is not outright disobedience, but it's awe. It's that child, caught up in awe. Maybe they were walking behind you, and this butterfly just kind of floated in front of them, and then suddenly they're just amazed by the butterfly's ability to fly, by its beautiful colors. Maybe, they were walking right behind you, and then suddenly they saw the ants, and they thought, wow, these little things are so cool. Look at them. They're going everywhere. And look at it. They're picking up stuff, and they're just kind of following behind each other, like they got their own little mini parade going on. Or maybe they're walking along, and suddenly, they just stop because they're looking at the cloud, and they're thinking, wow, that cloud looks like Snoopy. And they're just kind of caught up in awe in the moment. Whatever you do, when those spontaneous moments occur, which stop that little one or that young one in their tracks, please don't immediately interpret it, as they're being purposely rebellious or defiant. Now, sure, if you turn around and their body language screams rebellion, you turn around, and they're standing there with a pouty face or a defiant look in their eyes, and they got their arms crossed, and they're going, and you speak to them, you say, come on, and they go, sassy, and say, I don't want to. Well, sure, to treat those kinds of stopped in their track moments as rebellion and deal with it as such. But when you turn around and they've stopped in their track and you say something to that child who's just wide-eyed, staring at a butterfly, or who's, picked up that little turtle that just they happen to see walking next to the sidewalk, or that worm, and they're just holding it. And they're looking at it at that moment. Please don't treat those moments as rebelliousness on the child's part. See those moments, friends, and treat them for what they are. They are moments when the child has himself or herself just spontaneously caught up in awe. And remember, it's not their fault that they were stopped by that sense of awe. The experience of awe, is not a fault. It is a gift from God. And I think we ought to treat it as that. Experiencing awe is a part of our makeup. It's a part of our spiritual DNA. Listen to, if you will, and think about these words from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. You can look this up in your Bible or on a Bible app if you like to. Just kind of keep, going back to it in your head. But listen to and think about these words. Ecclesiastes 3:11 reads like this. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I believe, friends, that verse speaks to the idea that you and I were wired by God to experience awe. Even more, I think it speaks to this idea that we were created by God to crave the experience of awe, to hunger for moments of awe. In much the same way, since the day we were born, we have craved food to eat and water to drink and air to breathe. God has set eternity, the Scripture says, in the human heart, and yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Doesn't that give you the idea that we were meant to and designed to experience awe? By the way, that craving for awe-filled moments and the experience of awe, those are not things that we can ever outgrow, any more than we can outgrow those cravings for food or water or air. I mean, think about it, okay? Think about it. We adults, we may not get caught up in the moment when we see a caterpillar crossing our path the way we did when we were kids, but we know it's true. We do, on occasion, find ourselves awestruck and getting caught up in the moment. Maybe it happened for us when we got out of the car and stepped out of the car and looked out in front of us there at the beach and saw the ocean. Or maybe we saw the Grand Canyon, and in that moment we were just awestruck. Maybe, maybe we were awestruck when our eyes first laid sight on that newborn. Maybe we're awestruck at a venue as we listen to our voice singing in unison songs of worship to God with thousands of others. We have this in our spiritual DNA. Awe happens. Regardless of our age, it happens. And I believe it happens, friends, because God programmed it into us. I believe God, created us to experience awe of places, awe of people, awe of things, and awe of so much more. And I believe God did it not so you and I could simply have those experiences and those moments of experiencing awe, but I believe God created us with this ability to experience awe, and He created in us a craving to experience awe in a lot of different ways for this reason, so that you and I would be filled with awe of Him. Through the years, I've had adults come to me and talk to me and complain as they're talking about Christmas. And I've had adults come to me and say things to me, things like, well, at my age, I just really, I don't get into Christmas anymore. Christmas that's for kids. It's not for adults. That's just how it is. Or they said something like, I just cannot bring myself to enjoying Christmas the way I used to. In fact, I don't think I'll ever be able to enjoy Christmas the way I used to. Things will never be good for me at Christmas anymore. They won't be as good as they were before. And then you can insert the name or the relationship of someone they lost. Christmas will never be good. It'll never be like it was before Mom died, before Dad died, before my husband died, before my wife died, before my child died, before my best friend died. I've had people say, Christmas used to be fun, but now, it's a pain. And it's so sad. Probably the thing I've heard the most through the years when people have complained, as adults, complained about Christmas, the thing I've heard the most through the years is their inability to recapture some emotional, warm, fuzzy feeling about the day or about the season that they experienced at some moment in their past. Now listen to me, okay? I'm going to be very straightforward with you, and some of you may have a hard time taking in what I'm about to say. But what I'm going to say to you is I do believe is true. I think, friends, that all of those feelings of disappointment and all of that lamenting and all of those complaints about not being able to enjoy Christmas for whatever reason, I think it all boils down to this: misplaced awe. I think at the very foundation of all those negative feelings, those negative statements, what you have, folks, are people looking for satisfaction, looking for a fullness of heart in all the wrong places. They're looking for satisfaction. They're looking for their hearts to be filled by people and places and things and events in this world, and it's never going to happen for them the measure for which they long for it to happen. And why is that so? I'll tell you why. It's because God did not create us and the world we live in to work that way. In this life and in this world, friends, God created us to find heart-filling satisfaction in Him alone. And as we live in awe of Him and we look forward to our living with Him forever in the kingdom of heaven, that's where the satisfaction comes from. The reality, friends, is when it comes to our Christmas experiences, the reality is this: even the best, the very best of our Christmas experiences, they don't last long. I'm not trying to put it down on your holiday. I'm just telling you, even if it's a great Christmas for you this year, it won't last long. Even the best Christmas feelings and warm fuzzies and experiences, by New Year's Eve, you've moved on from it. And the reality is, when we think about it, we know it's true. Even the best of all of our life's experiences, they don't last that long. And there's a reason for that. It's because, friends, we were not created to find our satisfaction living in this world. And we weren't created to have our hearts filled by the things of this world. C.S. Lewis, in his work, Mere Christianity, puts it like this, and I quote, he says, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy. The most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And friends, that is so true. The awfulness, that is AWE, the awfulness of that first Christmas confirms it. Think about that first Christmas. When we look back on that first Christmas, we see its awfulness and its awfulness. When we look back on that first Christmas, as the Bible describes it, we realize it was awful. That first Christmas was awful. We romanticize about it. We make all these beautiful Christmas cards about it. But that first Christmas was awful, folks. It was awful in the sense that some very terrible and very tough and difficult things took place. And at the same time, when we look back on that first Christmas, we see that it was all full in the sense that people's hearts were filled with awe of God and the things God was doing in their midst. Think for a moment, if you will, about how awful, as in terrible and tough and difficult, that first Christmas was. John MacArthur writes in his book, God with Us, the Miracle of Christmas, he writes, in all likelihood, Joseph and Mary were very young. They were probably in their teens because marriages in their culture tended to be arranged at a very young age. Betrothals often occurred when girls were as young as 12 or 13. What we know about Mary indicates that she had reached a level of maturity beyond most teenagers. Perhaps she was in her late teens or early 20s. Joseph was probably not much older. Their lives were, however, forever changed when the archangel Gabriel appeared to Mary with the announcement that she would bear a son. Consider, he writes, the impact that news had on them. Did you know, for instance, that Joseph almost divorced Mary over the pregnancy? We can only imagine, he writes, the agony and the heartache that he experienced when he first heard Mary was carrying a child that he knew wasn't his. That first Christmas, friends, there was a whole lot of awful. There was a whole lot of bad things. I mean, terrible, difficult things, tough things that took place. There was, obviously, as Dr. MacArthur points out, there was that huge initial strain on Joseph and Mary's relationship. There was probably, if you think about it, there was probably, a lot of hurtful gossip that circulated about the two of them in their small little town. There was Mary's having to travel a large number of miles, probably on the back of the donkey when she was about to explode with child. There was the murder of infants by King Herod. There was the flight to Egypt that Joseph and Mary had to make, which removed them from everything that they were familiar with. And then there were the wise men bringing those gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I mean, sure, the gold probably came in handy, but what good was that sweet-smelling frankincense and myrrh going to do Joseph and Mary? They didn't need aftershave perfume. They needed diapers and infant clothing. No, seriously, when you start thinking about how bad you had it last Christmas or how bad it is for you this Christmas, I hope you'll remember that first Christmas had more than its share of awful to it. And yet look what God did. That first Christmas not only had its share, I think more than its share of awful, as in terrible things, it also had, you see, its share of awful moments. Awful, as in people's moments where people's hearts and minds were filled with awe of God and again, filled with awe over the things God was doing in their midst. When Gabriel visited Mary, that was an AWE space FULL moment. When Joseph was informed by God that Mary, in fact, did not cheat on him, but she had been true to the betrothal, and she was, in fact, bearing God's son, no doubt Joseph was filled with awe. When the angels visited the shepherds, when the wise men saw the star, you see, there were lots of awe-filled moments Lots of awe-filled hearts that first Christmas. And as we approach this Christmas, my hope is that we will allow God to speak to us through the things that He has told us about that first Christmas, so that this Christmas season, we too will have our hearts filled with awe of God and all of the things that God has done and the things He's doing. You see, really, and truly, friends, whether we know it or not, whether we believe it or not, it's awe that we desire. It's a craving for the experience of awe that burns deep in our hearts. Again, He has set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And friends, I'm hoping that we'll all have an AWE space FULL Christmas, because that's what we desire. And because I hope we have an all full Christmas this year, because God deserves it. God deserves, and God is worthy of our being in awe of Him. The scriptures speak of God's being awesome and God doing awesome things lots and lots of times. For instance, Exodus 15, verse 11 says, "Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who's like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders?" Deuteronomy 7:21 says, "Do not be terrified by them, for the Lord your God who is among you is a great and awesome God." Job 25 verse 2 says, "Dominion and awe belong," catch that, dominion and awe belong to God. He establishes order in the heights of heaven. And there's so many other verses, others as well, like Psalm 93 or 99 verse 3 says, "Let them praise your great and awesome name. He is holy." And then there's Daniel 9:4, where in his prayer, Daniel describes God as being the Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps His covenant of love with those who love Him and who keep His commandments. In the New Testament, we read how in the presence of Jesus, people were filled with awe. In Matthew chapter 9, after Jesus forgave and healed a paralyzed man, we read there in verse 8 how the bystanders at that event, how that miraculous thing responded. According to verse 8, it says, "When the crowd saw it, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to men." On another occasion, Luke 7:16 tells us of how people reacted after they had been watching and listening to Jesus. There it says, they were all filled with awe and they praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help His people." But this next verse is the one from the New Testament I really want to draw your attention to. We read in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28, these things. Hebrews 12:28. "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let's be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe." There are two things I just want to point very quickly out to you in that verse. The first is that it talks about our receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. That's talking, friends, about how Jesus' followers are going to go to heaven. And then the second thing I want to point out is there in that last phrase. Did you catch that last phrase? Let me reread it to you. It says, "And so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe." Worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Friends, you don't have to take my word for this. The Bible clearly teaches it. Acceptable worship of God involves reverence and awe. By the way, the announcements about Jesus that were made that first Christmas, the announcements about Him being the Son of God, announcements about Him being Emmanuel, which means the name which means, God with us, announcements about Jesus saving people from their sins, they all reinforce the truth that the reason even our best experiences here on earth do not bring unending and complete satisfaction is that we weren't created to find those things here on earth. but instead we were created only to find them in God, and ultimately to find those things in our being with God in the kingdom of heaven forever. And so again, my hope is that we will all have an AWE space, FULL, Christmas this year, because we desire it and because He deserves it. And I believe we can. And I believe we will if you and I will purposefully choose to fret less about the trappings and the traditions of Christmas and focus more on the wonder and worship of God. I believe we can and we will have an awe-filled Christmas this year if we play down the evolved myths and the so-called magic of Christmas and put more emphasis on the miracle, the true miracle of Christmas. Far, far more fantastic and more incredible than the story about a guy in a red suit leaving the North Pole to give gifts to deserving children one night a year. Far more fantastic, far more incredible, far more awesome is the Bible's true record of Jesus leaving the very glories of heaven and His coming to earth and being born as a helpless baby, and His growing up in poverty as a man who lived in Galilee, whose body was reddened by His own blood and hung and died on a cross so that He could give every person in the world the opportunity to be forgiven of their sins and the opportunity to receive from Him the gift of eternal life. So, may we approach this Christmas, friends, with peace and joy, hope and love, and especially this year, awe for the news of that baby in the manger. It's good news for all the people.